Our second reading today is from 2 Kings, chapter 5, verses 1 to 14. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he surely would come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. His servants approached him and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. What would you do for a Klondike bar? For the life of me, I don't remember any of the things that people said they would do for a Klondike bar, except that the answers were silly. You might remember. Anybody remember any of them? No. The reality is there's very little that we would do for a Klondike bar, right? I mean, when they're on sale at the grocery store and they come out to be about 50 cents a piece, then occasionally we'll buy them. But full price, not so much. Not so much. And then the question comes, what would you do to be happy, to be whole, to be fulfilled? They are foundational questions, aren't they? Some folk and sometimes in some places would argue that they don't really even get to ask those questions about being happy and whole and fulfilled because they're overwhelmed by questions about survival. People would say that perhaps questions about being whole and fulfilled aren't really foundational questions at all, but they are first world questions. Ones that people who live lives of luxury like you and I do can ask, but other people don't really get that opportunity. I think I disagree with that, though. I think they are foundational for almost everybody, except those in the very most dire of circumstances, and probably then only for short periods. I think the reality is that most people in the world, most of the time, wherever they fall on the spectrum, from those who are the poorest and least, all the way up to those who hold vast, vast sums of wealth, all of those folk are really concerned with those questions above all else. How do I find meaning? How do I find purpose? How do I become the person that my heart calls me to be? Naaman was pretty close to the top of the heap. He had everything, almost. He was the equivalent of the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Aram. He had the king's ear. And whenever there were questions about military things, he would go to the king, and the king would listen and make decisions based on what Naaman had said. Now, we don't know how he got that position. He lived in a time and place when those kinds of places really were often hereditary. Often you got them because you married the king's cousin, and the king happened to like you, things like that. But in this case, regardless of how Naaman got the position, by this point in his life, he held it because of his skill. People knew his skill everywhere. He was a mighty warrior. He was a respected leader. His troops followed him into battle because they trusted that he was making the best of choices. The king valued his work. He had an international reputation. As we read this passage, we see there is this assumption everybody in the passage knows who Naaman is. And they're not exactly pleased about that when he comes. When he mounted his chariot and led his armies into battle, the enemies trembled and hoped for mercy. And as we read it, we get hints that there's more than that going on. We get hints that he was equally successful in his home life. That he probably had a spouse who loved him. And children who brought joy to his heart. His servants and his slaves respected him and seemed to be glad that they were in his service, to the point that this young girl who had been stolen in a raid, she was taken from her homeland as a slave and placed in his home as a servant to his spouse, and yet she still hoped for the very best for him. You get the sense he treated his slaves and servants with respect and dignity because they cared about him and they looked after his needs. And they had a sense that they could talk to him and he would listen. He was for them a whole person, not just a violent warrior. And he was wise. He had to have been. He listened. People in those kinds of positions don't always do that, do they? People in leadership sometimes think they have all of the answers, that they got there because they deserve to be there, and they don't listen to anybody else. But that wasn't the case for Naaman. He took advice even from a slave who, by all logic, really would have wanted the worst for him. But instead, he took her advice. He was the picture of success. And at this point in the story, everyone would say, yeah, if only I could be like Naaman. But it's not the whole story, is it? When Naaman walked down the street, they walked to the other side, not only because they were afraid of this mighty warrior. They still walked to the other side. Some stared at him, some turned away. When he wasn't looking, some even pointed. And I can see parents telling their children, "Don't look at him like that." Some shuddered, some shook their heads, some whispered. Others wondered, maybe even out loud, what terrible sin he had committed that he received such punishment. And that was a common belief. If you had some terrible thing happen to you, it was only because of a flaw in your character. They couldn't see what it was, but it had to be there. When he went into battle, the fear that his enemies had was twofold. They knew he was a mighty warrior, and they feared his sword, but that wasn't all they feared, because they saw his disease, and they feared it as well. Naaman was a leper. Now, the word in the Hebrew is a bigger word than our word. When you picture leprosy, you have a very specific disease in mind. This word covered more than that. It covered a whole host of skin diseases. But they always feared the worst when they saw that. And they didn't know enough to be able to differentiate between one more benign disease and that full-blown leprosy that we think of. And so they assumed that's what it was. And that's how they would have treated him. In its worst forms, it is terribly disfiguring. And so, in all cases, someone called a leper was cut off from society. Indeed, had Naaman been Jewish, he would have been cut off also from the religious community. They would have declared him unclean. And he wouldn't even have been allowed to properly worship God. But even had there not been religious reasons in his homeland, still all except those who were closest to him would have been cut off. And even those closest to him would have still been afraid to get too close. He likely never hugged his children, never shared a bed with his spouse. He had one characteristic that defined him. Naaman, above all else, was a leper. I would bet that had he been given the choice, Naaman would have gladly chose to trade all of his accomplishments, all of his position, everything that he was, to find healing. Well, there was this young slave girl who had been taken in a raid to Israel, who looked at her master, and she said to his spouse, she said, you know, if he just went to Samaria, we've got a prophet there who could heal him. And the spouse goes and says, Naaman, this girl, she knows a way that you can get healed. And Naaman then goes to the king and he says, my friend, there's hope. They may not have really had faith, but they had hope at least. And it says so much about all of these relationships, that it begins with this slave girl who gives advice, and the spouse takes the advice, and he goes and he speaks to the king, and the king listens. And so, all of these people who wanted only the best for Naaman conspire together to make something happen, and the king writes a letter to the king of Israel, and he puts together this amazing number of gifts, and he says, go, take this letter to him, and these gifts. Oh, and by the way, because of the amount of stuff that he was carrying, you can bet there was also a serious contingent of armed men there. And so Naaman goes. And the letter says, this is my right-hand man, cure him. Everyone had faith up to this point. The girl knew the possibilities with God. Naaman trusted her. The king was willing to do whatever it took. The king of Israel doubted. He tears his robe in grief because he is sure that this is just a ruse to start a war. He's sure that for whatever reason, the king of Aram needs an excuse to attack, and so he sends Naaman, and if Naaman doesn't come back healed, the king of Israel assumes this is just a reason to start a war. A war which everyone expects Israel would lose. So Elisha gets word of this. He hears what's going on, and he sends a message to the king, scolding the king, saying, send him to me. I'll take care of it. Well, I think at this point the king is feeling kind of desperate, says, I might as well. What's the worst that can happen? We're still going to all end up dead. And so the entourage travels a little bit further to Elisha's home. And imagine this picture as it goes through the countryside, this inspiring and fear-inducing sight. Chariots and wagons filled with riches beyond imagining. Soldiers, attendants, all marching down the roads. And I can imagine the people lining up to watch, knowing that if things didn't go so well, they would see these very same soldiers again in the not-distant future with a very different look on their faces. Their armor no longer shining in the sun, but covered instead with blood and dirt. Elisha knew about Naaman. He knew who this person was. He knew his reputation. He too knew if things didn't go well, that thousands of people would die. And it was all on his back. Well, you can say nothing about Elisha if you can't say this guy's got confidence. He knew the protocol that you follow when you encounter an important person like Naaman. There are things you have to do to show respect, to show deference. He knew the complicated rituals that involve ceremonial washings and sacrifices and examinations by a priest. All of these things that you had to do to declare somebody clean from leprosy. He knew all of those things. And yet, when Naaman and his entourage show up in front of his house, and one of Naaman's servants starts to get down before he's even off the chariot, Elisha's servant comes out and says, oh, don't bother getting down. Because just keep going. The river, Jordan, it's a little ways from here. Just go there, wash in it 7 times. You'll be clean. That's it. He goes back in the house. Middle Eastern ethics call for special treatment of guests. You don't turn them away before they even get to the door. You don't ignore the entourage there waiting. You don't insult someone of Naaman's stature by not following all of the proper protocol. You don't diss the traditions of your own faith by not doing what you're supposed to do. And yet, that's exactly what happens here. Elisha ignores it all. He never even speaks to Naaman. And off Naaman goes. Off he goes. He sees insult in these instructions. He feels as if he has been dissed. He was expecting magical incantations and dramatic rituals. He was expecting prayers and moanings to God, and instead he's just told to go wash in the Jordan River. I've never been to the Jordan River, but I'm told it's really not much of a river. That's my understanding. I grew up where we have rivers. We know what a river is. It's just we would call it back in Pittsburgh a creek. Wimpy went at that. Naaman says, aren't the rivers at home in Syria better than the Jordan River? Why did I travel this far to be dismissed and insulted? And he leaves furious. And I imagine as he's starting back, he's looking around, and he's assessing the topography, and he's thinking, that's a good place for a battle. That's no, we don't want to get caught there. Yeah. But if I bring my chariots, yeah, and he's got his plans, and he's making all of his plans as he's going. And another slave comes and says, Master, wait. Let's think about this here. If Elijah had told you to do something amazing and difficult, if Elijah had said, you need to take an elephant and climb Mount Everest, you would try. He just said something simple. Why not do it? What's the worst that can happen? You waste a few more hours and you get wet. Then you come back and you kill everybody. And again, against all sense of societal order and all of that, Naaman listens. And he says, yeah, I guess you're right. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? Waste a few more hours, I get wiped out, come back and kill everybody. And he follows the directions. And the text tells us he comes out of the water after the seventh dip, and he is clean. What would you do? What would I do to find wholeness, to become complete, whole people? When do we feel closest to that goal? When do we feel like we're moving in the right direction and becoming the people God wants us to be? I asked that question in Bible study on Tuesday. And the folk who were there came up basically with 3 answers. There were probably some others too, but I think they really all get summed up here. The first answer was to be with the people we love. To spend time with the people we love. To be with family in the deepest sense, not family just biology, although that may be part of it, but also family, those people who are in our hearts and who we carry with us, who make us who and what we are. Second, to feel as if I'm doing something important that makes the world a better place. And third, to be in nature, enjoying the glory of God's creation. I thought of those 3 answers, and I couldn't help but think of Naaman. Because none of those 3 answers are really all that difficult. They really aren't. They just involve time and decisions. Time and decisions. To make the time to be with the people whom we love. And if you happen to be one of those folk who don't have a whole lot of people whom you love, well, then get off your butt and go find some. You know, I've shared before that one of my seminary professors told us, you know, when you get older, it gets hard to have friends. Harder to make friends. And it's doubly so for clergy, at least, and it used to be even worse, because they used to tell clergy when you were training, you can't be friends with anyone in your church. Well, who else do I know? No, not them, not them. They used to tell us that. Well, Jan Chartier, said in one of her classes, said, you need to find people that you want to make friends with and court them. It's good advice. Good advice. So if you don't have that group of folk whom you love, go find them. Go find your tribe. And spend time there. Make that decision. Doing something important that makes the world a better place. It doesn't have to be huge. You don't have to stop climate change. But you can do one little thing. One kind word for someone who needs to hear a kind word. A smile for someone who just needs to know someone sees them. Maybe a bigger choice than that. But just that time and decision to make the world a better place. And being in nature and exploring the glory of God's creation, well, you know what? You got a leg up on that one for sure. There are all kinds of places where at least we would say it's kind of difficult to see that. Here it just knocks you over. But it's easy to take that for granted. I was telling someone that, you know, every now and again when I drive through the Gaviota Pass, it takes my breath away. You know, I take my breath away every single time. Because it's breathtaking. It's gorgeous. And then I drive 15 miles along the ocean. Every day. Twice. I see whale spouts from my car. And it's Tuesday. But it's not Tuesday. It's amazing. If we open our eyes and we just see, we allow ourselves to take that time. It's not all that difficult, none of those things. It really isn't. It's just a matter of choosing. That old Nike tagline, just do it, has been stolen for so many settings. And unlike the Klondike bar ad, it had some depth to it. Now, yeah, I know that sometimes just do it isn't. It's not that simple. But sometimes it really is that simple. The wholeness for which our hearts yearn really isn't that far away. Now, it's rarely as dramatic as it was for Naaman. You're not going to dip in the Jordan River 7 times and come up with skin like a child. Not going to happen. But the wholeness that we yearn for is still there. If we decide to make time for the people we love, if we drink in the beauty around us, if we work step by small step by maybe bigger step to make the world a better place, not only for the people around us, but maybe even for the entire world. We don't need to have prophets waving their hands over us. We don't need to have preachers preaching in holy tones. We just have to do it. We just have to do it. And it's right there waiting for us. Just do it.